Hello, and welcome to DTT Podcast, Languages and Technology, brought to you by the European Commission's Translation Department. I am Anna Holmén, and for this episode I am joined by colleague and fellow linguist Stefanie Selmer, interpreter at the Directorate-General for Interpretation of the European Commission, or as we call it in everyday Commission jargon, DG SCIC. Welcome to the podcast, Stefanie.
Thank you.
It has become a bit of a tradition in this podcast to start with the language journey of our guests. So could you tell us how you first fell in love with languages and how it took you to where you are now?
Well, as long as I can remember, I think I have loved languages. Like many Swedish parents, my parents spoke English when we were not supposed to understand what they were saying. So English came in rather quickly. Then I went to a school that taught French from the first year, or already from kindergarten. And I've spent many summers in Italy, so there were 3 languages already in there. And I can even remember asking my mother, "Oh, what's this in German? What's that in German?" So I've always had that interest.
Okay, so that's brilliant. You got it from childhood and
Yes.
from your family. Stephanie, as an interpreter, have you ever experienced that people are not quite clear about the difference between translation and interpretation?
Oh, yes, on a daily basis. Even the other day, the chairman of a meeting said, good morning to the translators. So this is something that we always struggle with every day.
Well, I'm not surprised because, of course, as translators, I used to be a translator, we have the same experiences. So let's start off with the definitions of the 2 words, the 2 professions, and then delve a bit deeper into the ins and outs of interpretation. So I start. What does a translator do? A translator works with written texts. It used to be parchment and feather pen, then it evolved to pen and paper, and now it's keyboard and screen. So over to you, Stephanie.
Well, we work with our voices. We have headphones and microphones, just like here in the pod. And we listen to somebody speaking and interpret that immediately and make sure that we get the message across, but it's not going to be word by word.
Yeah, indeed. So the short explanation is that translation is about written text and interpretation is about spoken word. However, I have to defend all the people who don't really get the difference because in everyday life, the way you use the words, you do say, can you translate this for us rather than interpret? And of course, translators also interpret the text that they get. They look at it and see what is the meaning, how do we transpose it. So it's quite understandable that people don't know the exact difference of what we are doing. And from the translation side, I must also admit that it's clear that interpretation is perceived as being much more visible and even much more glamorous. And then there are different types of interpretation, right? Could you tell us a little bit more about that, Stephanie?
Yes, so what I explained the first round was interpretation, simultaneous interpretation, which means that we sit and talk at the same time as the speaker who we interpret talks. We also have a version where we use pen and paper, which is called consecutive interpretation, which means that we sit and take notes when a speech is given, and then after the speech, we give the interpretation into our language. So that's pen and paper, that's called consecutive. We also do have something called chuchotage, which is a word for whispering in French. And that is if you sit next to the only customer you have and you whisper in his or her ear, the translation or interpretation.
You see.
Yeah, I know.
And translators, we mentioned pen and paper, we mentioned keyboard and screen, and of course translators also use a lot of other tools such as translation memories and machine translation, various AI tools to support the quality work and the terminology work and so on. And how about interpreters? How has artificial intelligence affected your work?
Well, we also use AI as a support tool, for instance, with translation. If there is a written speech, we can have a rough translation via an AI tool. And then there are many things being developed. There are things called speech to text, where the AI actually writes down immediately what is being said. And that is going to develop to something called Boothmate, where the AI will put down names and numbers, because numbers are very difficult for interpreters. So then you have the number in front of you. So it's like having, instead of having your neighbors, your colleague sitting writing down the numbers, the AI will do it.
Boothmate.
Boothmate.
Okay, because you sit in booths, you have
Yes.
interpretation booths per language, right?
That's right. Yeah, we're sitting normally 3 colleagues in each booth. So yeah, that's the Boothmate.
Okay, and of course I have to expand a little bit on what you said about numbers. You said it's difficult for interpreters, but of course that is really the highest level of knowing a language, right? Even people who speak a foreign language really fluently, when they count, you very often hear them going back to their mother tongue.
Yes.
So I suppose that's why catching the numbers is difficult.
It is probably, but it also, if you say 86, I only listen to the beginning of the word, because then I start talking myself, and then that 6 disappears somewhere when I'm talking. You probably don't listen to each word all the way to the end, and I think that's why the numbers are difficult.
Okay. Oh, that's really interesting. So it's you kind of speed listen the way you can speed read.
I think probably we do, because we often know in which direction the speaker will go. We know which country thinks what. The problem is, of course, with German, where they can say a whole sentence and then they say nicht, which means then you have to start all over again, because then it's, disregard that. It's the other way around.
Yeah, I understand that interpreters who interpret from German, they have all sorts of tricks to handle that, to be able to stall a little bit until they know if it will be negated, or they know that the verb that comes at the end, which verb it is.
Yes, you have to sort of guess a bit.
Okay, and I do know that you love your job. What is it that you enjoy the most?
Ooh, it's the variation. It's the being there when it happens. It's exciting. And I think especially the variation. You work with fisheries one day and the next day you work with civil law or something. So I think that's what keeps me going.
And you also get to be really in the middle of, European politics.
Yes, no, we are the flies on the wall that many journalists would like to be. We're sitting interpreting all kind of ministerial, political meetings, all the way up to the European Summit, where you have the heads of state and government. So that's really exciting, although most things are decided in the corridors, unfortunately.
And of course, as EU officials, we all have very high ethics. But I know that, especially for interpreters, as you are around when you are in summit meetings and so on, it's very, very strict.
It's full confidentiality, and we can't talk about the meeting with anybody, either a friend or husband or anyone. Can we really tell what's going on? And some of the meetings are so confidential that we're not even allowed to have our phones or computers inside the booth while we're talking. And some of us also have an extra security level where we've been checked in our home countries.
So it is quite a glamorous job, actually. It's very exciting.
Well, if it's secret, doesn't mean that it's glamorous, but it is. Yeah, I suppose it is. And then I should also add that very often you can ask an interpreter what was said during the meeting, and we have forgotten, because it goes in through one ear and out through the mouth, and then we forget it because next sentence comes. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can also ask a translator, okay, so you were translating all day, what was it about?
Yeah.
And sometimes, even though you really have to understand the meaning to be able to do the job, because for both interpreters and translators, another very important point that I always try to get across is that we are not dictionaries. It's not a question about translating word by word. It's a question about understanding the meaning and then getting that across. So you do have to understand what you translate, what you interpret, but then you need to empty your brain so there is
Yes.
space for the next.
No, but this is also why many of us interpreters, and I believe also the translators, are not only linguists, but also I am a lawyer. I have many colleagues who've studied business or obviously politics. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a very important point that also goes for translation. You need to know the subject matter. And I guess that it happens also in your job that you need to replace a colleague, and it happens to be at fisheries and you haven't studied
Yeah,
all
no,
the fishes.
we're not always super prepared, so we can be thrown into things.
Yeah, but do you specialize?
No, not at all. We can have all the different meetings. We're only 14 colleagues in the Swedish unit, so there won't be enough of us to specialize.
Your path to become an interpreter, it's a really nice story. Could you please tell us how it happened, how you ended up here?
Yes, as I told you, I've studied law, and after my studies, I applied for what they call nowadays Blue Book traineeship here at the Commission. And this was the year 1994, just before Sweden joined in 1995. I was, I don't know what you call it, but they were looking for people who knew languages, because there were no Swedish interpreters, conference interpreters at all. And we came here and had to do a test here in Brussels to see if we had the aptitude to become interpreters. And then we had a 6-month course, and every 2 months there was a test. And if you didn't pass the test, you had to go home. But I ended up staying here. So I moved here in January 1995, and I didn't know whether it was for 2 months or as it's been now 30 years.
Okay, and as it's 30 years, this means that fairly soon, many of the interpreters who were hired then, they need to be replaced, right?
Yes, with one exception, we're all between 50 and 64 in
And is
our
this
unit.
the case for not just for Swedish, but for other languages as well?
No, this is not only the case for the Swedes. Even the Finnish unit has run into problems because they joined just the same year as us, 1995. And we can also see this in other units, for instance, the Danish unit, where there has been a lack of interpreters.
And what would you say to someone who might want to become an interpreter, who's been excited by what you've told us here? What should they do? What should they study? Where should they go? What's the way in?
So they need first academic studies of almost anything, I could say, but then they need to study interpretation. And for instance, in Stockholm there is an institute, but I think that most countries have, on master's level, they have interpretation courses.
And then you can also do a traineeship with the DG SCIC, right? Or do you just go for students? No.
No, at the moment there's no traineeship here at the SCIC, so you will have to study and then take the test, the end test at the university, and then there is an accreditation test for DG SCIC, but then you have to be trained already, unfortunately.
Are there ways you could kind of test yourself to see if you have the talent to do interpretation?
I suppose that you need to try out whether you can do the simultaneous interpretation, and that's really a thing that either you can or you cannot, and there's no in-between. You cannot sort of train to do it. Don't do it with the news, BBC News, it goes too fast, but listen to speeches. We do have in a website here, speeches that have been read in by interpreters, so you can listen to them and try to interpret them.
Yeah, I joined a presentation with an interpreter once, and they suggested that the first thing you could try is to repeat what someone says in the same language, just to see
that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, are you able to listen and speak at the same time?
Yeah.
And, can your brain jump to the next word while you're saying the previous word, and then you go from there to a foreign language that you know very well, and then maybe one that you don't know as well. So
Yes, no, all of these things are probably good. We should also remember that you always interpret into your mother tongue, so that's the language you know best, hopefully. So you don't start trying to work from French into English or something. We do get to travel, less so now than we used to, but we do get to travel, for instance, to the country where the presidency is held. So now it's the Cyprus presidency, and so we're going to go there for a summit. The Swedish unit doesn't travel as much as, for instance, the French unit, which will go to several informal meetings in Cyprus at the same time. So we do get some traveling. And then we also travel to our home country to interpret when the Commission is doing revisions or audits of the different supports that have been sent from the EU.
okay, so
Then we go home.
And then you go home. That's good.
Yes, still home 30 years later.
So if our listeners, if you or someone you know would be interested, please follow us on social media for translation. It's at Translating for Europe and at EU Interpreters for Stefanie and her colleagues. And you can also go to our KCTI. Stefanie, do you know what KCTI stands for?
Yes, it does stand for Knowledge Center for Interpretation and Translation.
Almost correct. For translation and interpretation.
Ooh, you beat us on that. It was our...
Well, we didn't want the acronym to be IT.
Okay.
Oh, yes. So that was it. The Knowledge Center for Translation and Interpretation, where we continuously gather useful resources for EU translators, EU interpreters, and students studying for either profession or for both, which is also not that uncommon that people have studied to become both a translator and an interpreter. Thank you for listening to DGT Podcast, Languages and Technology. Stay in touch and share your thoughts and questions on Instagram or Facebook, as I said, at Translating for Europe. Don't forget to subscribe in your preferred podcast app to stay updated on EU multilingualism and translation topics. Until next time.